Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is a special monthly meeting for PEER and Long Island activists. My name is Catherine Zoka. I'm co-chair of PEER, Progressive East End Reformers. Tonight, we're privileged to have a discussion with the Democratic candidate for New York Governor, Jumaane Williams, to hear his vision on how to make government work for all of the people. NYPAN's Long Island chapters, Long Island activists, and PEER are sponsoring tonight's events. And we will start with a land acknowledgement. We are graced to live on the ancestral territory of the Manhasset, Montaukett, and the Shinnecock people. Both Long Island activists and PEER strive to work with the Shinnecock Nation in their efforts to protect their sacred lands and their peoples. For those of you who don't know, the two chapters of NYPAN, Long Island Activist covers primarily Nassau County and Western Suffolk, and PEER is on Eastern Suffolk County. So I will drop later in the chat some information about how you can learn more about the two chapters, how you can join if you want, and we welcome you. Both of our chapters are multi-issue grassroots organizations, and we're committed to advocating for issues that impact all Long Islanders: healthcare, social justice, housing, and climate. And we do that through electoral politics and activist issue-oriented engagements. Our co-sponsors tonight are several grassroots organizations on Long Island, including East End Action Network, East End YIMBY, Long Island Network for Change, Reach Out and Rebuild, Solidarity Sundays East End, Suffolk Progressives, and together we will Long Island. So I will drop in the chat momentarily information on how you can learn more about the two sponsors tonight. Just a quick message to say that Valentine's Day is coming up, and I'm not mentioning that for the Valentine in your life, but because it's the deadline for changing party affiliation. So if there's anybody here who is not yet shifted over to a Dem, we really urge you to consider doing that so that you can vote for this amazing candidate for governor that you'll be hearing from. And if you're in Melanie's congressional district, for her. So what to expect tonight? After some statements from Melanie DeRigo, who will be on, you will then have a moderated discussion with the candidate Jumaane Williams, and the moderators are Catherine Levy and Joe Sackman. Both Catherine and Joe are members of the executive committee of NYPAN, and they are both on the leadership committee for their organizations. Catherine Levy is with PEER and Joe Sackman is with Long Island Activists. We will then have a time for questions and answers so that you can ask the candidate questions directly. What I'll ask you to do is to drop in the chat the question that you have, and we will be monitoring it to put the questions forward to the candidate. Then Robert Buonaspina from Long Island Activist is going to wrap us up with calls to action and other pertinent information. So let me give a brief introduction to Melanie so that you know a little bit about her. Melanie is running for Congress in Congressional District number 3. She is from the South Shore of Long Island. She is the mother of 3 children, and she has a master's degree from the School of Health Professions at Long Island University. Melanie has worked as a healthcare advocate and strategist ever since then. Melanie helped found Be the Rainbow and is a Nassau County delegate for New York's National Organization for Women. Melanie has also served as CD3 representative for National Nurses United in the fight for Medicare for all. So I'm going to drop in the chat how you can help Melanie by joining a postcard campaign that PEER has put together with Jerry Maslanka. And at this moment, I just want to turn it over and let's give a warm Zoom welcome to Melanie DeRigo.
Well, Thank you for the warm Zoom welcome. I wish we were in person. I love the energy. And Catherine, thank you for mentioning Valentine's Day. I too love voting, so don't forget to change your registration if you need to. It's always wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight and tell you very quickly a little bit about my campaign. As Catherine mentioned, I'm a lifelong Long Islander. I'm your homegrown progressive, and I'm running for Congress in New York's 3rd district. I did run for this seat in 2020 because I was tired of watching politicians sell us out to the highest bidder over and over and over again. And when the pandemic hit, we had a decision as a campaign. We could keep campaigning or we could transition to mutual aid. And with the help of many organizations on this call right now, we were able to provide gallons and gallons and large tubs of food to people all over the district. And that's a testament to the folks on this call. And we made that decision. We made the decision to switch to mutual aid because this was really never about winning a seat, right? It was always about winning for our communities, about getting services and funding so that we could help working families right here at home. I ran on a platform of Medicare for all because I believe that healthcare is a human right and that we shouldn't have to choose between paying our prescription drug medication or paying for our food or our rent at the end of the month. I ran on a pro-peace, anti-war platform because I believe that our children should not have to sacrifice their lives or their mental health to line the pockets of corporations. I ran on a Green New Deal because I know that climate change is the existential crisis of our generation. And for once, it's a resolution that puts those most vulnerable at the front of the line. I ran on a platform that said no to corporate money. Because when we let corporations control Washington, we get a Supreme Court that refuses to uphold democracy while it readies itself to strip us from our reproductive health. We get a government that locks kids in cages and lets our planet burn. We get a government that lets people die and stay sick rather than pay for healthcare for each and every one of us. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be that way. We can elect representatives who fight for people first policies that center the needs of our families first and foremost, always and without exception. And that is what I'm fighting for. We know that change is possible. We know we can do it because in the last election, while we were outspent 10-1, we secured nearly 30% of the vote against an entrenched incumbent. This time it's a different story. This time we're back to finish the job and we're going all the way. It's a very crowded primary. And as you all know, the district has changed a little bit. So we've got some ground to make up, but it is okay because I know that I've got the grassroots with us and I'm going to be here for you and we're going to do this together. My one and only ask that I have to make this pitch. If you believe in what we're fighting for, we will not only send the first progressive to office to represent this part of the island and District 3, but we'll send the first woman to ever serve the seat. So we need your help. And in order to do that, in order to help us reach voters, we need you to contribute to the campaign. If you can make a contribution, no matter how small, each and every dollar, each and every cent that goes into this campaign goes into voter outreach. So if you can help us, if you can invest even a little bit, this is the campaign to invest in. We're also taking volunteers. We're out in the field doing lots of door knocking and phone banking, even right now, even in the cold snow. So please join us. And thank you so much for having me tonight. And very excited to hear from Jumaane.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. We appreciate your being here. I see that Doug has dropped
just sent the registration link to your email
in the chat that how to support you. So, we're waiting right now for Jumaane to join us, and I think that Catherine Levy may be in discussion with him or with his campaign staffer.
They're just trying to join. They're having the same sort of problems that Melanie was having, but they're doing the registration link as opposed to going through a straight link. So okay. That's going to happen any moment, but
he's in.
Great. Well, Tripp is in. Is Jumaane in as well?
Perhaps he's coming in on his.
Tripp?
So while we're figuring out if Tripp and or Jumaane are on the call, again, we want to just thank Melanie Dorigo for making time to be with us this evening. And we also want to urge you all to support her campaign. Dropped into the chat that we have a postcard writing program in place to send postcards to help her campaign. And the person that you can contact, Jerry Maslanka's email is there. So we encourage you to do that. And I think most people know how to copy the chat so that they can hang on to the information that's there.
Emily, can you unmute Tripp? He can't unmute himself.
Make him a co-host, perhaps.
Hey everyone, I'm good right now. My name's Tripp Yang. I'm Jumaane's campaign manager. Great to be here, and I know Jumaane should be jumping on any minute now.
Do you want to tell us, Tripp, about today in Zuccotti Park while we're waiting for Jumaane? Because it was a great event. Emily, you have to unmute Tripp.
Hey, I should be fine. Yeah, hey, so we it's been a really exciting couple of days on the gubernatorial campaign. He on Monday night we were endorsed by NYPAN and Our Revolution, which was really fantastic, incredible moment that we've been waiting for a while. And then Tuesday, the Working Families Party State Committee formally voted to endorse us, and we had an exclusive story in the New York Times. And earlier this morning in Manhattan, we did a presser with a number of the affiliate groups with working families. So New York Communities for Change, Make the Road, Citizen Action, Alliance for Quality Education. It's really exciting. He has been on a whirlwind swing throughout different areas. Right after this morning's presser at Zuccotti Park, which folks know was ground zero for Occupy Wall Street, and one of the centerpieces of our campaign, having a transformative economy, making the rich pay their fair share, and so that we can truly fund so many of the correct, popular, progressive policies that so many on this call have been fighting for a long time. This afternoon, Jumaane went to the city of Hudson, and he had event there with the mayor and the Common Council majority leader electeds who have endorsed his campaign for governor, and had a really good event talking about housing justice and other priorities. And he is en route to Rochester right now, doing a couple events in Rochester tomorrow morning, doing some things in Albany, and I know he was in Long Island in person most recently in October. He'll be back in Nassau and Suffolk counties very shortly in person. But in the meantime, it's great to be here on the Zoom with so many like-minded folks.
Hey, thanks, Tripp. We really appreciate you jumping on and filling us in on what was an auspicious day for the candidate. And I think he's actually on our Zoom right now. So we welcome candidate Jumaane Williams. Let me give you a brief introduction, and then we'll turn it right over to the moderators who are going to be in discussion with you. For those of you who don't know Jumaane, and we hope there's some people on the call that haven't yet been able to listen to him speak, you're in for a treat. Jumaane has served as the New York City public advocate since 2019. And prior to that, he represented Brooklyn's 45th district on the city council for 10 years. As has been mentioned, he's already been endorsed by some pretty big organizations, including Our Revolution, Working Family Parties, and NYPAN. Jumaane has really championed landmark legislation throughout his career, including sponsoring the Community Safety Act to combat stop and frisk. The legislation was enacted despite a veto by then Mayor Bloomberg. He's worked on legislation to really bring a community center approach to dealing with many issues, including gun violence. And as chairman of the council's Housing and Building Committee, he's a strong advocate for affordable community housing both now and in the future. So after serving for 2 decades as an advocate for the people, Jumaane is running to be our next governor and to bring transformational change to fix Albany's broken infrastructure and corruption. So over the past 10 years, the former governor's austerity budgets have hamstrung progress in healthcare, education, and climate. And now we're going to hear how Jumaane Williams' vision on these and other issues will make a change for all New Yorkers. I'm going to toss it over to Catherine Levy, who is going to start the moderated portion of our forum. Thank you.
Hi, Jumaane. I hope you've been able to catch your breath in between events today. Is somebody, is that you, Jumaane? Somebody needs to mute their background noise. Sorry. This has been, it's been an exciting week for you. I watched the event in Zuccotti Park. I thought it was terrific. I want to begin by talking about this extraordinary 2 years that we've all lived through and to ask you your opinion about this. What systemic and long-standing problems do you think our experience with the COVID crisis has revealed about what's going on in the state?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Catherine and Joe and everybody who's helped put this together. And just thank you, NYPAN. Having the endorsement of NYPAN is awesome as well. And thanks for bringing me back out here on Long Island, which is going to be really important to us as we move forward. And we have some momentum growing now, which is a really good time for momentum to be growing. I think most of us politicals have been paying attention to this campaign, but the voters are now starting to pick up in the convention coming next week. It's a great time for momentum, so just thank you. I think most folks would agree that the pandemic didn't really create any new issues. They really exacerbated and highlighted the issues that we all have been fighting for such a long time, whether it was housing issues, whether it was the need for quality healthcare, mental health services, whether it was the food scarcity issue that wasn't talked about as much as it should have been. As I mentioned, our mental health. What's been interesting to me is somehow people believing with all these things happening that crime wouldn't go up. We knew that it would, and we said it would. We've seen, unfortunately, certain specific crimes of violence and suicides going up because we never had the structural needs met in so many communities. And if we had, we might not have been hit as hard as we did. We became the epicenter of the epicenter. And one of the things that I keep saying when I hear leaders talk about going back to normal, it really, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me, because I don't want to go back to normal. Normal didn't work for most of us on this call. Normal didn't work for most folks in Long Island. Normal worked for a select few of people. When you talk about the issues around climate change, when you talk about the issues of needing to raise revenue to address these concerns, they've all been there before. They've been exacerbated now. And I'm worried that the current governor, although maybe doing it in a nicer way, is going to be pushing forward some of the similar policies that we saw before. And that's not going to get us out of this. And it's actually going to continue to make it worse.
So I think that leads right to the question that Joe was going to ask. Joe?
Thanks, Jumaane, for being here tonight and taking your time. I know you're really busy. And yeah, it's going right into housing, your favorite subject. So what we've got here, what COVID has illuminated about housing and what statewide legislation is needed to protect renters and those who face eviction and also would protect small landlords.
You could just see a stark difference between our campaign and our candidacy and that of the current governor. Everyone knew that housing is a place where you see it, just don't even need that much explanation. Everyone knew that the eviction moratorium was going to need to end at some point, but to do it in the middle of winter, in the middle of a surge of coronavirus, to do it without even having good cause eviction there, which is the minimum we should be asking for. To do it without having some assistance for our small homeowners who we keep trying to pit against, and we don't have to, our small homeowners against foreclosure, just makes no sense. And to further that, to lean into this and be prideful of saying, oh, we're going to try to build and preserve 100,000 units across the state was astonishing to me. You know, I'm from New York City, and 100,000 units is not enough probably for one of the boroughs, much less all of New York State. And they lean into this like as a source of pride. And it says to me that we have a governor and an administration that doesn't either understand the magnitude of the problem or doesn't have the courage and ability to act on it. And when you look at the donor history of the governor, which is very similar to the last governor, you start to begin why. So the first thing we need to do is have good cause eviction in place. Second thing we need to do is have funding to protect our small owners from foreclosure. The third thing to do is really lean into what the units that we have to build and preserve. We have to jump that 100,000 to at least 700,000. 60% of that, 70% of that has to be for preservation, and the rest has to be building real income targeted affordable housing. We have to get rid of 421A. It needs to be thrown into the garbage. And we have to provide real rental assistance for tenants at the market that they're in so that we can give them the real help that they need. Lastly, we have to connect homelessness and housing. We sometimes talk about it separately, but they're both very much interconnected. We know that most folks, when they talk about wanting to deal with the homelessness crisis, they actually mean they just don't want to see homeless people, which is different than actually providing answer to homelessness, which is primarily housing that people can afford to pay at their income level. And there is a subset of those folks who need additional support services like mental health services, like substance abuse. Unfortunately, we have a large population also dealing with domestic violence issues. So we have to understand each part of that population and provide what's needed there. You need the political will and courage, and you need the resources. And again, if you're opening salvo, is that you're not going to entertain any revenue raisers, that's a problem. If you're starting out saying we're not going to raise any taxes, I was appalled when I heard that. And he was talking to our donor base. And we all know that is a Republican playbook that makes people be afraid who are not ever going to be feeling the impact of revenue raises. And so we have to, and we can deal with lower and middle class taxes, dealing with the inequities of property taxes. I was in the city council, actually one of 4 council members who sued the mayor of city council, the city of there, saying we have a disproportionate impact of property taxes, and we have it all across the state. We have to deal with those, but you can't deal with those and then not raise revenue from the wealthiest among us. And unfortunately, that's where this governor is leading. So even the things that she says she wants to do, we won't be able to fund it because our federal dollars are going to run out. And so I'm very concerned about the issues we all care about and how we're going to get to. And that might be why she only said 100,000. Maybe if she's not going to raise revenue, that's all that we're going to be able to do, which is not going to solve the problem at all.
Great, thank you. So I have a follow-up question. Same thing with housing. So as in healthcare, where costs are growing exponentially for businesses and municipalities, Long Island housing costs are through the roof. What, from a state perspective, as governor, would you do to make a significant impact on the housing problem on Long Island?
And I did forget to, I just want to make sure we always talk about public housing all across the state. Our public housing is being neglected both in management and in funding. As I mentioned, we have to provide some protections from people being evicted. Good cause is the minimum way to do that. It does, I'm sure folks on this call know, but it does provide protections for small owner-occupied homes as well, which we want to make sure we do that. We have to get rental assistance for the market that people are in. We have to give foreclosure prevention assistance for people who are facing foreclosure 100%. And we do have to provide some property tax relief for folks as well. We have a tendency to kind of pit these things against each other. and there's no need to do that. If we have the courage to get some of the revenue that we know needs to be gotten to do these things, we also know, and the governor's own budget director, who probably shouldn't be there, but that's another conversation. Even he, Robert Mujica, said that we have not lost millionaires and billionaires due to any tax increases. Just hasn't happened. We have lost tens of thousands of New Yorkers who can't afford to stay here. And that's the thing that we have to really focus on.
Yeah, I think those of us who live on the east end of Long Island would tell you that there's no dearth of millionaires and billionaires in New York State at the moment. A lot of people on this call have been working for years for the New York Health Act, and it's frustrating because we see healthcare costs for individuals, businesses, and municipalities keep growing, sometimes exponentially. Care deteriorates at the same time. And yet we still have a difficult time convincing people that the New York Health Act is the way to go. How would you convey to people that it is possible to provide excellent health care to everyone without the kind of catastrophic financial burdens that so many people are facing?
I don't know that we've done a good analysis even of how much it costs now to provide the services, as inadequate as they are, to provide the services the way we're doing, allowing people to use emergency rooms for basic healthcare needs. So we have to do a better analysis of that. I think we'll see there'll be more savings there than people actually think. If we don't understand the connection between healthcare and public safety now, I don't know that we ever will. So we have to play that up a lot more. And then frankly, again, we have to be honest about the money that we need to do these things. And we have to raise revenue to actually do that. And this is not something new. The reason we got here is because we didn't fund it before the pandemic. So it's not like we're raising new issues. We said this needed to be done before the pandemic. And if it was, we actually might have been better off. We might have had people not afraid to get the services that they need much earlier, or worried about bills if they went and got the services. And quite frankly, I would just include mental health services there as well. Communities that can't access them, and some communities that need to get some work to take away the stigma. Once you do that, and then they still can't access it, it's even more problematic.
I know that you've been a longtime supporter of the New York Health Act, but how active a role as an advocate for the New York Health Act do you intend to take in the campaign? And if you became governor, what would you do to try to get the New York Health Act finally passed in the legislature?
Well, it's something we talk about very often on the campaign. Again, when we're talking about public safety, we have to talk about the things that make a community safe. So actually having access to housing, actually having access to quality health, access to the health needs is part of public safety. So we bring it up all the time. And we do say, it's interesting, people talk about, quote unquote, the progressives. And I always say that, but everybody's trying to show, even as they are screaming at progressive, that they also are progressive. Cuomo was saying he's progressive. Leaders say I'm progressive too, which means the progressive ideals are actually the right ones for working families. That includes healthcare for everyone. And you have to have someone that has the courage to say that. Again, as I mentioned before, when we're pushing it, we have to be able to show all the sides. We have to be able to show the savings that would occur. We have to show the connection of public safety, and we have to show that we can fund more of these things if we're willing to raise revenue from the few people who are actually richer now after the pandemic than they were before. And so I think that's important to have a discussion. But it's hard to do that when you have a governor that wants to make sure that she continues to get the donors and the donor money from the very people. You look at the nursing homes and the money she's getting from there, and unfortunately are not doing the kind of accountability that we thought was going to happen after we changed administration.
Yeah, the nursing home situation is terrible. I agree. Joe, you wanted to ask something about the climate situation that particularly affects us here on Long Island?
Yeah, I mean, the climate crisis, it doesn't just affect us here on Long Island, it's worldwide. And New York can be a leader in how we address this crisis. So this is something where we want to know, what do you think has been lacking in the governor's approach to this huge problem of climate change? And we'll start there, and I'll have a follow-up question for you after that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Again, we passed the Climate Act, but we haven't passed something to actually get it funded. And once again, it sounds like a broken record, but it's correct. It's a correct record. We have to be able to fund these things. And we can't do it by saying and scaring people who are never going to be, see an increase in any of their tax bills, just scaring them by saying we're not going to raise any taxes, because that doesn't make any sense. What we need is revenue raisers. And we have to have that conversation, not as yelling at folks, but saying, we have to have a conversation about civic responsibility. Everybody has to do what they can with what they have where they are. We saw that happen with the people you're calling essential, now that you're trying to treat them as expendable. And so we have to do that with folks who literally have 1 and 2 homes all over the place, literally have a second home in Manhattan's most expensive districts and don't want to be taxed on it. Like that's where we have to get the revenue to do that. Just recently, we came out against a point of work of Bitcoin mining, trying to get the governor to say that she would be against it as well. It's unfortunate that that she hasn't. And we do know that is, and I learned about it recently. As soon as I learned about it, I said, of course, we got to go to Seneca Falls right now and try to get that thing stopped. But unfortunately, it's been expanded. And just to add, this is not against necessarily cryptocurrency, because there are different types of mining, like point of scale crypto mining doesn't harm the community, the timing as much. We also have to just make sure we stop building and funding projects that are dealing with fossil fuels and put the funding into changing the infrastructure so that it's dealing with renewable energies. That's the only way we're going to get out of this. But again, you have to have somebody that's willing to say no to the groups that have a lot of money and put in the infrastructure that's needed, which will give us some additional jobs, by the way. So it's a win-win.
Okay, thank you. I think with that, I'm just a follow-up question on the Community Climate Investment Act, which again, you brought up funding, and it's, is this the legislation that we need to go with, or, and if so, you mentioned one of the revenue raisers, that I know the investor in New York has talked about, what are your thoughts on the Community Climate Investment Act, and how could we pay for it?
Of course we have to. We can't pass a bill and then not provide the funding needed to get it done. People in Albany like to do a lot of stuff like that, but this is really harmful. I will be having my first newborn in just a few days here, and I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to make sure she's coming into an amazing world where adults are thinking about them. So, investing on New York was a pillar of our campaign when we ran for lieutenant governor. We said then we have to entertain revenue raising. And if we did, we might have not been as hit as hard as we did. We became the epicenter of this pandemic, and that was completely preventable. It was about not having the leadership we needed before and during the worst of the pandemic. And so again, whether it is something as simple as having a peer-to-peer tax, or really having a true millionaire's tax, there's a lot of things that we can do to raise billions and billions of dollars from, quite frankly, the people who are not fleeing because they can afford to stay. So we can make sure all New Yorkers are looked after.
I love that you're focusing on revenue raising, and a lot of us worked on the Invest in Our New York Act, and the governor has money to play with this year because of the work that we did on Invest in Our New York, but that isn't going to last, obviously. But when you raise extra revenue, could you talk about maybe the 2 or 3 things that you would prioritize for more funding? I mean, there are a long laundry list of things, but what things do come immediately to mind that we most desperately need to fund in this state?
Well, one, as I mentioned, the tier tax is a huge one. Taxing some of those second homes are really important. The stock transfer tax is one that I believe is important as well. Getting a truer millionaires tax, I think we can do as well, grabbing even some more people who would fit into that 1 or 2% range, and stopping some of the subsidies we've seen that are not going to where we need to go. That includes 421A and IDAs that happen across the state.
But what programs or parts of the state do you think most need investment at the moment? I mean, I know that's a hard question, Jumaane, because there's so much, but what off the top of your head, if you were governor tomorrow, would you immediately put a lot of money into?
I mean, I have to tell you, as I travel around the state, there are a lot of regional differences and there are some cultural differences. The top lines, though, have always, well, I was surprised to see how the top lines were similar. And so from Long Island to New York City to Rochester, where I'm headed to, housing has been a big issue. Whether it is people who don't want to get evicted or people who don't want to get foreclosed on. So that is money that you can put on right now that's going to help everyone everywhere. When you think about access to healthcare, you know, there are some places that don't have the facilities up to par, and there are some places that have no facilities at all. And some places that the people who want to work there are not getting paid enough. When you think about public safety, increase in violence is occurring.
We can't hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
The phone is probably going to ring a couple times. I apologize. But when you talk about public safety, those are the things that people care about all across the state. And to address public safety in a real way needs real investment in certain communities that have never happened. So I'm not sure that you have to focus it the way you said, because I think you're doing this correctly. It is actually going to address many issues that people are facing, you know, all across the state. I mean, I've been speaking to folks in rural areas that their healthcare issue, obviously, in some places they don't have access to the facility, but they also don't have access to broadband internet to get televisits, even if they don't have it. So they manifest differently in different parts of the state, but the umbrella topic is very often similar.
Agree. I think Joe has some questions about public safety to ask you.
Yeah, you're hitting the questions before we get to them. So yeah, on the criminal justice reform and community safety, you know, what is your vision of criminal justice reform that would promote a truly equal justice and actually make communities safer? And what remains to be done after the recent criminal justice reforms?
You know, my priority is to make sure New Yorkers are safe and feel safe. That's another conversation. Sometimes they actually are safe but don't feel safe, and bad things still happen. I've been a leading voice on this issue for a really long time, for a little over a decade. I put out a plan 10 years ago. Some of that plan is finally starting to be realized, and we have people who are finally starting to talk about it in a real way. But I have to say this, I think Democrats do a poor job on this question. And because they don't know how to answer, they run away from it, and they let someone else who does answer with fear-mongering in mind. And a couple of years ago, when we had the movement in the streets and people were more focused on a word like defund as opposed to getting what we need in terms of public safety, I kept saying, look, our job as leaders is not to argue with activists and people in the streets who are expressing their trauma and expressing their pain. Our job as leaders is to take that pain and trauma and turn it into real workable policy solutions. So stop arguing with people about how they're expressing themselves, and let's address the root causes of public safety. We can all do that without having to worry about what terminology and what word people are going to use. And I tell folks, when I talk about this, just imagine a community that you deem safe. I won't tell you what that is or why, but you think about a community that you deem safe. And I will bet all of my money that nobody thinks of a community that has a police officer on every corner or a police car with their sirens going on all throughout the night. As a matter of fact, the communities that have that, most people don't deem safe. And that's not because those officers don't have a job to do, because they absolutely do. It's not because they don't risk their lives to run to danger and folks run away from it, because they do. But what's happening is actually we are asking them to do all of the jobs where other people have failed. And so we definitely have issues about supply and demand when it comes to gun violence. We definitely have to get these guns off the street. We have to deal with the trafficking, but the demand side is where we've been failing. Why are people using this gun violence to begin with? Why are people actively choosing to communicate in this way and killing people? And when you talk about public safety, what keeps a community safe? And the communities that you thought about that were safe definitely had access to safe and quality housing, definitely had access to good schools that at least had one sports program. They definitely had access to healthcare and mental health services, definitely had access to more than potato chips to feed their children. And if people will say, you know, these communities have asked for more police, and I'll say yes, they also asked for all of the other things, and somehow we didn't hear that and we didn't bother to fund it. And this is not an excuse. You cannot shoot and kill people. You cannot shoot and kill officers. You can't shoot babies. You can't shoot people in Burger King who are trying to go to work. My mother had a stray bullet go through her car window while I was sitting in her home. Praise God, no one was hurt. But we have to deal with these issues in real. So you have to have accountability and consequences for your actions. But what we have been doing is spending all of our funding and resources in the accountability and actions, which are not changing the behavior, instead of getting money, funding, and resources to address those concerns to begin with. And so what we have been saying for a very long time is the same communities where you're sending these police, where are the other agencies and what are they doing to help with the issues? We have community groups that are proven their intervention helps stop the gun violence from happening to begin with. How come they can't get the funding that they get? Or if they do get funding, they're sitting at the kids' table while the NYPD is at the adults' table. Why is everybody, including them, not looking at the same data and saying, here's the part that I'm going to play in these communities? Why are we saying we have to raise the age, but then all you're going to do is, according to your logic, which I'm not sure agree, but all you're going to do is change the age of who's doing the shooting, and I want the shooting not to occur to begin with. Why are we talking about bail reform where our bail reform has nothing to do with the gun violence that's happening all across this country right now? Why are we saying we want to review dangerousness? But when we look at cities and states that right now consider dangerousness, have a worse gun violence problem than us. So let's look at actually where the gaps are, where the loopholes are, and let's focus on that. And we had been saying before the pandemic, and especially as this pandemic was happening, we're going to have a problem with all these issues that we're not addressing. And these kids going back to school without an ability to process what's happening. We're going to have an issue if gun sales are through the roof, because every illegal gun in our streets was legal at some point. And so we have to address the supply and the demand, and we didn't do so. And I'm worried about having a governor that's just learning about these issues, because she may be apt to make some of the mistakes we've already made and apologize for in the effort of making communities safe, and unfortunately may cause more trauma.
Thank you. This is a follow-up question. You kind of mentioned it in your first answer. It's about messaging and countering the false narrative of criminal justice reform that is out there, specifically on bail reform. You know, how would you address that? What would your messaging be?
Democrats do a very bad job of talking about taxes and crime. So we just have to, one, acknowledge and not pretend that the gun violence is not going up. And so we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge what people are feeling. We have to acknowledge that people are not feeling safe, even if they are safe. We have to acknowledge that people aren't safe in some spaces. And I try to do that. I have been doing that for a very long time, just acknowledging the reality of what people's experiences are, because they are real. And then we have to, I believe at some point facts will make a comeback. I'm waiting for that time. But, we have to talk about what we're going to do to actually keep people safe. And so that means showing them that, the bail reform, the numbers don't bear out to what people are saying in terms of bail reform. And we've seen worse crime increasing in places that have never changed their bail and that experience dangerousness now. So let's look at what's happening. So police officers in New York City in particular have gotten more guns off the street than they've ever gotten, record numbers. So they're actually doing the job that we're asking them to do in certain instances. But the court system across the state is not moving fast. That has nothing to do with bail. It doesn't do with raise the age. It's just not moving. And so we have to figure out why these cases are not moving through. Let's get them through. And if someone unfortunately is guilty, they have to go where they're going. They should be going to a place that's humane and is actually set up to bring them back to their community better than they went in. And we should be trying to help that community be better than it was that produced what we saw to begin with. And we have to say if they're not guilty, we should get them home. And so there are places where we should focus on, and we can get everybody to work on together while pushing back on narratives that are simply based on pushing the narrative of fear. And I try to remind to Democrats, when we try to be Republican light, it doesn't work. Republicans usually win. And so people are looking for us to tell them not who to vote against, but who to vote for and what vision to vote for. And we failed on a number of cases when it comes to that.
I spent many years working as a teaching artist in the New York City public schools, so these questions are very dear to my heart. What do you think we could do to improve our schools, both in terms of funding and structure and oversight?
Well, I'm a public school baby from preschool to masters, educated in our public school system. I'm very proud of that. So it's definitely a jewel that has to be polished at times. I also went through that as a young Black man with Tourette syndrome and ADHD, and pretty rambunctious. That's a hell of a combination. My mom did a good job of raising two knucklehead children by herself. We turned out okay. I mean, funding is definitely one that looks different in Long Island and places around the state than it does in New York City. The current way we do many of this with the property taxes is problematic because there are a lot of places that are chronically underfunded. And we have to make sure that those places get the funding they deserve, get the funding that the courts have told them to do, and get it expeditiously. Funding by itself is not going to fix this. We have to make sure that we have a better structure in those schools and that the funding is going to the correct places, is going to the communities that need it the most, is going to, it's proud to be endorsed by 504 Democrats as the only statewide advocacy group for people with disabilities. But what we saw here was an exposure with the pandemic of who's going to get hit the hardest. And it wasn't surprising. It was Black and brown communities, low-income communities, and students who had disabilities. So they need the most attention, not the least attention. And so we have to have somebody that's going to get this funding into spaces that is going to help the people who need it the most. That takes a lot of work. It does take a lot of courage as well, because again, a lot of it has to do with funding. It does take courage to go after the property tax system the way we're doing. And that's going to be hard. But I keep saying, look, if the governor wins the election, she's going to worry about how to get reelected in 4 years. When I win, I'm worried about doing as much damage as I can in 4 years to change systems that have been entrenched for a long time. And that's how I've always governed. That's how I'm going to govern. I didn't get elected to get reelected or to go to higher office. To be clear, I like to do both. So I just want to be clear about that. But I got elected to do a job, and I hope that gets me reelected. But my seat is not more important than the people I'm representing. I understand how important our school system is. I got through that school system because one, my mother, who was annoyingly in my business, and was annoyingly all involved with whatever was going on in schools, and luckily had this privilege to have a job that she could come up every time she got a call from the dean's office. I always shout out Miss Jeannie Ned, my 5th grade teacher, who she actually had a thing for troublemaking young Black boys in particular. She paid a lot of attention. And I get concerned. I don't know if I would have survived in this school system because it doesn't seem like parents have as much ability to interact the way my mom did. And it looks like Miss Ned might have spent most of her time teaching to the test as opposed to having the time to give some additional attention to some people who just need that little extra attention. And it's led me to understand that our teachers, aren't babysitters. They're integral to the development of our children. And lastly, we should be funding programs like restorative justice, like healing justice models in our schools that bring so much more resources to these campuses that are needed for our students.
Jumaane, I can tell you as somebody who taught poetry to kids in the schools for years that those troublemaking Black boys are great poets generally. You just have to allow them to say what they want to say. But you pointed out disability issues, and it's something that most of us don't talk about. You live it, and it's a very big issue in the public schools because a lot of kids in special ed schools don't get the kind of care and attention that they need. So Tripp tells me that there's somebody who wants to, Michael, who wants to ask a question about disability. And I don't know who Michael is.
That might be the 504. Is that Michael?
Maybe Tripp, you could help us with this?
There's a couple of questions in the chat that I've been sending over to Joe Sackman, and maybe he has that question. I'm not sure if he does.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mike from 504 was on, or if he's still on. There's a question here from, I'm gonna let Lachi ask. So I'm gonna let you unmute there, Lachi, and you can,
Okay.
if you can.
Hey, it's Lachi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Amazing. Hi, Jumaane. That's awesome. So I have a super quick question. I myself am a blind Black female, and I'm very active in disability activism, not only here in New York, but nationally. And one of the things that I really want to make sure happens is that whenever we have these kind of conversations, that the disability question is at the very least asked, because not enough people ask it. But guess what? Over 26% of folks have disabilities, and this is pre-COVID. So there are a lot of folks with long COVID that are joining our community. And a lot of the times these figures that we see don't even include folks with neurodiversities or invisible disabilities. So we want to make sure, and I recognize that Hochul has put together a chief disability officer and sort of a disability advocates office, but just time and time again, we find that people do a let's help them sort of attitude and don't necessarily hear our voices. And we find ourselves in a about us, without us situation. I want to know, what are your plans to do with this office, or with whatever office you choose to create, or with whatever position you choose to create, to make sure that folks with disabilities from cradle to school, to the workplace, to beyond the workplace, what you plan to do to help us New Yorkers with disabilities, that increasing number with folks that are coming in with COVID, with your newly elected office, to make sure that we receive an equitable voice in what we need. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm really looking forward to your answer.
Thank you. I have found something you said to be true in a lot of areas. People kind of build, one of the things that people see the most, like people will build programs, youth programs with no young people on it. So it's doomed to fail to begin with. And I think you're right. People who are not New Yorkers living with disabilities sometimes tap to create these programs. And we're not doing things with the community. We're doing things sometimes to the community. So the first thing is to make sure I'm surrounded by folks who are dealing with plethora of disabilities such as yourself, to see what's best needed. Michael Schweizenberg, I think that's who was on before, from 504 Democrats. Always make sure that I'm as up to par as I can be on the issues of most concern. We've tried our best to make sure that we're reaching out to the community when we're hiring, to make sure we have folks from all parts of the community to be in our offices working, helping us focus on these issues. And so it's not enough to have figureheads in there, but we have to have people who can understand, and then we have to back it up with real funding. So a good example is in the MTA in New York City, where people for years have been saying that there are people with certain disabilities who can't get around in the MTA system. And literally, we couldn't get something as simple as elevators on stations, even as they were building. And so you have to have people who are going to focus on this and then have the courage to back it up with the funding that's necessary. But I look forward to surrounding surrounding myself with people who have lived experiences, because people who are closest to the problem also have the best answers and solutions.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Lachi, for that question. And so now we're gonna go to Serena Ligori. I'm gonna ask you to unmute and bring your
It looks like
question.
I may have frozen.
We can still hear you. It looks like your bandwidth's a little low, so it went to
Yep.
your image, but we can still hear you. Serena, are you there?
Yes, hi there. And thanks. Great to hear from you, Jumaane. I know that out here on Long Island, New Hour and the work that we're doing with incarcerated women across the island continues to be supported by you. And we're so grateful for your support, especially as it relates to Rikers Island and closing Rosie's and making sure we get folks community-based interventions that are needed. So really, really great to be here with you. I don't know if we lost Jumaane.
Did we lose Jumaane, Trip? Do you think we lost Jumaane?
It looks like we lost him. Maybe he'll get back on. Yeah.
Should we wait to see? Oh, he's logging back in, Trip says.
Serena, if you can hold out for a moment.
I can tell you as somebody whom this happens to all the time, just when I'm sitting in my writing studio, it's very frustrating. Trip is sending me a message about it.
He just came back in.
He's in.
Okay.
I think we need to unmute Serena.
I got her. Thank you.
Okay, great. Great to see you, Jumaane, and thank you so much for fighting so hard for Long Islanders and folks throughout the state who are behind bars. So, you met with New Hour, you met with the Social Justice Action Network, and we're going to continue to fight for decarceration. My question to you is, what do we do to motivate and I guess mobilize moderates? Because out here, that's our biggest challenge. And folks are so disconnected and divided around bail reform. I've penned some op-eds. We've told the truth, and yet it is still completely misrepresented. And frankly, it's just something that the right is continuing to mobilize against. So my question is, what can we do out here on Long Island to continue to support truth and decarceration? And what will you do if in office to really escalate and accelerate decarceration? Because so many folks get into office and then they become moderate.
I often wonder when people say they're moderates, what is it they're moderating on? Are you moderating on people's needs to actually live good lives? I hope not. It's similar to and connected to the public safety answer. I always, when I'm talking with people that I vehemently disagree with, I try to remember, I don't know what journey they took to get to the position they're in. So I really try to honor that. I do know a lot of folks are afraid that it's clear that there's racism and all the other isms involved there. That's a harder fight, which you just got to continue. But to the extent that people are genuinely afraid, I always try to make sure I address that fear. What is it that you are afraid of? That this may happen to you, I understand. But here is what my plan is so that you feel safe. And here is how that plan that you're trying to do, like change bail, not only doesn't keep you as safe as you want, it causes other harm. And I think sometimes, not all the time, but we actually skip addressing the very real fear that they have, whether it's real or perceived. Sometimes it doesn't matter because both of them can cause danger, but we can't skip that. We can't skip over that. And some of the elected officials who've been elected, especially on the Republican side, have done a much better job of tapping into that fear, which we all hear, and just which we all have, and blowing out of proportion. We need to do better at tapping into that fear, acknowledging it as real, and saying this is our plan to actually keep you and your family safe and address the public safety, address that gun violence is going up. And this is what we're going to do about it.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Serena. So we're gonna go to Livy Mann from Rise and Resist, and she's got a question for you.
Hi, Jumaane. The questions I've put in the chat have been pretty much around climate and how we're going to pay for mitigating and dealing with the climate crisis. It's been 3 years since the Climate Community and Leadership, Climate Leadership and Community Act was passed, and not a penny has been put toward it, which means that we've lost 3 years out of the 11 that we were originally allotted by those who know to bring our to protect our global temperature from going above 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we've lost 3 years in New York. The tax the rich movement seems to have been kind of dwindling. The momentum in Albany around climate seems to be dwindling, even though in the streets it's as passionate as ever. And I'm just wondering, how are you going to recreate the urgency, the desperately needed urgency to get behind this, and where are you going to get the money? I mean, the pied-à-terre tax that you were talking about is like $500 million, $500 million, maybe $1 billion. That ain't nothing. We need 15 billion a year, and we don't just need the 15 billion or whatever we have in extra federal money this year. We need it every single year and probably more. So how do you plan to sort of refresh the climate, refresh the mindset in Albany to acknowledge that this is our urgent existential crisis that has to be addressed and paid for?
Well, one, I think it's not just me, it's we. Like, how are we going to do this? And I say that with all the advocates that I meet with, because I come from there, but we all have to get together and decide, how we're going to fund these things and where we're going to fund and put some of these monies in. So I want to make sure I'm always clear about that. I'm there as to help kind of move this stuff around, but we're going to have to do this together. I also, the Invest in New York together actually can fund between 50 and 70 billion dollars. So I think that's a good number, even if we don't get all of them. We also have to, I think, change how we're using some of this language. So I think you're right. Some of the language is not as fervent as it was. And when I tried, even as we're trying to tax the rich, that connotation hasn't worked. So I think we have to change the conversation about civic responsibility. What is everyone's civic responsibility to do what they can with what they have where they are? I try to talk about fairness fees and revenue raises out of fairness fees. You can't ask people who are literally choosing between housing and prescriptions to fix the things we have to fix. You have to ask the people who are choosing which plane they're going to use today. That is just common sense. And so I want to help with the conversation to move it in a way that people can really receive it. And I've had a lot of experience, particularly around public safety, in doing that, having that conversation that gets people. I have people who really thought they just despised me based on what they heard in some clips. When we get to sit down and have a discussion, they agree with 95, if not more, % of what it is we're talking about. I think we have to do that when it comes to a transformational economy, when it comes to economic democracy. People understand that. They understand that they don't want all the billionaires making decisions that help them or leave them out in the cold. And climate change is something that affects all of us. It's something that we definitely have to continue to push. And I think people understand it. I do want to make sure we're doing it while understanding that there are some communities who are hit the worst by climate change, but are also worried about where they're going to live and how they're going to get health care. And so when we have those conversations, I want to make sure we're doing it with those things kind of right in tandem with it, so people don't think we're ignoring what they're dealing with today, even as we know that we have to make sure that tomorrow is going to exist, and that's climate change. And we have, it's actually climate now, I guess. And we have to fund the things that we're putting in place, or it's not going to work. We have to have a governor that has the courage to do that.
Muted. So thank you for that. So we'll try to get a couple more questions in, and I'm going to call on Kamau next. Kamau, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now, Joe?
Can hear you fine.
All right. Jumaane, my children are millennials. My daughters are in their 30s. I think that's millennial. And my son, he's in his 20s. I guess he's a Gen Z. These young people, they are not interested. Their interests, they're all working, by the way, and making good money. And they're concerned about cancellation of student debt. They're concerned about holding police officers accountable. They're concerned about creating more opportunities for them to make money and build capacity and that kind of thing. I heard someone ask a question earlier about appealing to moderates. And my problem with that is that I'm of the firm opinion that moderates, so-called moderates, will never vote. Most of them will never vote for a Democrat. And I think Democrats like yourself, who consider himself a progressive, need to be reaching out to Black millennials, not only Black millennials, but all millennials, young people who have specific concerns. So when they talk about police reform, they're talking about police accountability. They want to get into the weeds here. They want candidates who have a plan, for instance, to hold police officers accountable. They want candidates to talk about, when they talk about bail reform, to get into the weeds about what is bail reform. And bail reform is essentially addressing the historical instances of judges imposing higher bails on Black defendants and lower bails on white defendants. You need to get into the weeds here, because when you talk about reform, when you use the term reform, it's a euphemism, and folks actually don't know what you're talking about. So are you, as your campaign progresses, are you going to get into the weeds, all right, to address the concerns of millennials who are interested in police accountability, cancellation of student debt, that type of stuff, and forget about the moderates who are talking about who are afraid of this and afraid of that? Because the millennials that I know, they're not afraid of anything. They're going about their lives, riding the subways and doing their thing, hanging out with their white friends, and they don't have those issues that these so-called moderates have. And I think Democrats need to focus on the millennials and their concerns and forget about the moderates, because they'll vote for the Republicans anyhow.
Okay, I'm not, can folks hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you for that. I would say you brought up issues I've worked on for most of my political career, and quite successfully. One of I started to get to know then Councilmember Jumaane Williams. I was actually dealing with the abuses of stop, question, and frisk when we were able to pass the Community Safety Act, which put the first ever Inspector General over the NYPD, and we had the first time enforceable ban on bias-based policing ever. And we did that by being able to communicate what was happening, because again, whether it's moderates or not, I do want to honor everyone's experience. I do want to honor everyone's fear. Fear makes us do terrible things. And so I do my best to have the conversation. And I actually do my best to get into the weeds of what public safety is and what public safety isn't. Because when you do that, you can then actually kind of assuage people's fears, and you actually do have a public safety plan, and it is rooted in accountability and transparency. Those are the two places that we haven't done as much work as we should. We can say communities deserve to have and deserve to demand and get better policing and safer streets, which we can actually do. One of the problems is too often you're asked to answer questions in sound bites that they can't encapsulate everything that's needed on these important conversations, and then people use that to stoke fear. So people who are getting the quote unquote moderate vote are feeding into their fears. I don't know about completely ignoring everyone. I do think we have to focus on people like your kids and yourself and people who are here. But what I've found is that Democrats have ceded ground unnecessarily. The reason I don't mind speaking to quote unquote moderates or others is because I actually believe what I'm saying is actually correct. What I'm saying works more than the Republicans who were doing fear mongering. And I have the data to back it up. I have the success rate to back it up. And so we keep trying to ignore conversations that we don't know how to answer sometimes. And we can't do that. We have to address people's fears and the concerns. We have to do it by getting in the weeds and showing programs and policies that will actually keep people safe and will actually get them the transparent and accountable policing that everybody actually deserves. In terms of getting rid of student debt, yeah, that's an easy one. And I'm saddened that I was a Bernie delegate both times. I supported Bernie, and I think he would have been best. We have someone in office who said that they were going to do certain things, and it's not being done. And I think that's part of the reason that people are disillusioned. And it's hard for me when I hear Democrats blaming progressives for policies they never adopted or try to even adopt to begin with.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask Colin Palmer to unmute himself and ask his question.
On Long Island and Riverhead, and also a fellow DSA member. So it's great to see you running. I'm curious to kind of hear how exactly your administration would work to help students affected by learning loss that's being experienced by COVID. And also, especially with hearing everything about what the governor has announced over the past couple of days about lifting mask restrictions, even though this is an incredibly divisive topic. We just had a school board meeting last night that was really, really divisive with people expressing their views about masks. What exactly are your opinions about keeping children safe in schools when it comes to COVID, including masking and vaccinations?
I was talking about this to some of the folks I'm coming up with, this disappointment of how, the simplest thing about wearing a mask has become such a divisive issue, and people crying and complaining that they want their child, and people to see their child smile, and they compare it to slavery, all kind of craziness that has occurred. And that's the dangers of allowing people to win office that are good at stoking fear. So that's why I always want to try to address people's fear as we're moving forward. And we often are in a situation where we have bad options, and we have to choose the best of the bad options. We have to say we're choosing the best of the bad options, and we have to be able to explain why we're choosing the best of the bad options. I've already put out a statement saying I don't think this is the time to be getting rid of the mask mandate. I think we have to follow the science and the CDC guidelines. They have just recently said we're supposed to be using stronger masks. That was a couple of weeks ago. And now we're saying we don't need any masks. And that's for a few reasons. I think people are naturally going to start to not be as aggressive in wearing the masks anyway, just because the time goes forward. And we should be keeping the messaging on of how important it is to wear the mask. We don't want to start losing all of the progress we've made. And so if we start to do this too quickly, we're in danger of doing that. What I would have done is probably set another date in the near future and look and make sure that we're still continuing to progress the way we want to progress and sustain that. I've been supportive of the vaccine mandates and the mask mandates, even though they are not politically popular in some places. They are and have saved lives.
So my colleague, Mr. Sackman, thinks that we need to wrap up here, and I'm sure that you and Tripp believe that as well, even though that we have a lot of questions left. So maybe we can ask the questions at a later time. I have to say, Jumaane, I so appreciate your going back continually to trying to understand other people's point of view. I think that a lot of us do deep canvassing, and I think that that's a great way of trying to interact with people and convince them of things that they seem to be unwilling to talk about when you first approach them. Would you just want to wrap up for a moment? Tell us how we can help your campaign, and maybe Tripp wants to chime in about that as well.
Thanks so much. This is an awesome conversation, so I appreciate it. I always like coming to and speaking with activists and folks in Long Island. There's a lot of energy there that I think people are not realizing. So whatever I can do to keep pumping that energy up, I want to do that. We are getting a momentous stride right at the right moment. So one, folks can join our campaign in whatever way possible as we're building out an infrastructure and help us get the message out over there. And another way is to help with the donations. Whatever folks can give at JumaneWilliams.com. We're never going to outraise this governor, but we do need a minimum amount to win. And we've shown where we can make $1 out of 15 cents in 2018. But everybody's looking at where we're going to be in the next filing. And we got to try to show that we're further along than where we are right now, frankly. I still think we can get it done. I know we can get it done based on the energy I'm seeing here. And by the way, this energy is we can see all across the state. I know people kind of point to 1 or 2 elections and try to make believe that our message doesn't work. But all across the state, people who think like us have gotten elected in the last election and beyond. And so it's working. But we do have to make sure we have the funding to get our message across. In 2018, when we won 47% of the vote, wherever we got to, and wherever we were able to get to people to hear our message, we won them over. And so we just want to make sure we can have the funding to do that. And we know we'll have a winning campaign. So thank you very much. And I know Tripp is on and wants to mention something.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add, we are feeling cautiously optimistic where things are at. As Jumaane said, in many places around the state, he already has more support now than he ever did at the end of the tail end of that 2018 Lieutenant Governor campaign. This week has been significant with NYPAN, Our Revolution, Working Families Party, and it's only Wednesday evening, and so many more endorsements coming out. Some big news and events coming in Rochester and Albany tomorrow. And, we're running a 62 county campaign. And so Jumaane, the campaign will be back in Long Island in person and in Zoom very shortly. Definitely want to acknowledge, the Long Island activists, Progressive East Side reformers, many of the co-sponsoring organizations that made this happen. Joe Sackman, Catherine, and many others here. And petition is coming up in New York State, is coming up on March 1st. We are very excited to be in a formal partnership with Our Revolution. I know there's a lot of affiliations with NYPAN and NYPAN chapters as well. I know Our Revolution has sent a number of links where folks can volunteer. You can also go to JumaneWilliams.com and we'll get you plugged into the campaign. But we're very excited to have a statewide voter contact petitioning operation, meeting folks in every congressional district. And, like some other folks have said earlier, it's important to build lasting, sustainable, progressive energy throughout the state, especially in places like on Long Island, where some Democratic insiders don't fully appreciate it just yet. And electoral campaigns sometimes are very good vehicles for that. So thanks again for allowing us to be on this call.
Thank you. Thank you, Trip, and thank you, Jumaane. It's always great to see you, and
Thank you.
appreciate you taking all the time you have to speak with us. And we definitely want to hear when you're going to be out here next, and we hope to bring some more people along to continue the conversation. So again,
Absolutely.
appreciate
Thank you so much. Peace and blessing. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Melanie DeRigo. Let's give a shout out to her as well.
Yeah, and I think Robert's going to take us out. Robert?
Yeah, I was just gonna wish you well, Jumaane. We're all supporting you here. We want to see a day when you're in power, and we'll be there to help you every step of the way as well. So we wish you well. We put in the chat's links to volunteer for the campaign. We put links into the website. I just watched your YouTube video earlier tonight, and that was very inspiring. Everybody should watch that video. Good luck in Rochester, and we're here to back you the whole way.
Okay, great. See you on Long Island. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, have a great evening.
All right. Go Jumaane, go Melanie.
See you next week. We got a big Ione town hall next Wednesday at 7.